significant as to where you replace the parameters by their expressions, actual parameter expressions, and then go and do the evaluation. So of all these different mechanisms, we would more focus on the first one and the last one, that is call by value and call by name. And I would like to point out that there is a fundamental difference between these two. In call by value, if you look at any function call, say f is a function, let's say that that would square the parameter, and suppose you are calling it by a plus b, an expression a plus b. So the question is, what should you do first? Should you compute a plus b first? That is, should you compute the parameter expression first and then the function expression? Or should you replace the function expression by the parameter expression a plus b and then do the computation? Right? You can see the basic difference. So when we do the first, that is compute all the parameter expressions and then compute the function, we are actually resorting to call by value. But when we replace the parameter expression in the function expression everywhere and then do the computation, which is what is also referred to as lazy evaluation, we are resorting to call by name. So call by value is what C supports. Call by name is what the macros in C will support. Both of them, of course, are available in C++. Call by reference is, or call by address are variants of these, but these are the two fundamental different approaches of deciding whether you first evaluate the parameters and then evaluate the function, or you substitute the parameters in the function and then evaluate it, right? So whether it is eager or it is lazy, that will decide your computation order. And you all know the different pitfalls in macro, and you will know that the same expression could lead to different results depending on the process of what you are doing, whether call by value or call by name. So when we have actually talked about earlier in programming languages in C, C++, that macros are risky because they have a lot of side effects. You should actually do inline function, which has the same efficiency as macro, but actually use call by value. You have seen that difference, that call by name may have certain difficulties in languages like C++, but or C, C++, but call by value will not have that. So that's I'm not recommending anything specifically here, but I'm just pointing out that. And based on that, we saw some of the examples. I'm sure you have tried these out. So this reduction strategy is to find that normal form where there is no further beta regex is available. And we have asked 4 questions. Can every lambda expression be reduced to a normal form? The answer to that was no. SA is a great example where you can see that it does not have a normal form. No matter how many times you keep on applying the alpha beta reduction rules, it will still have beta regex left in that. Second question, we said that if there are more than one way to reduce a particular lambda expression, we got the answer to that is yes, that there are multiple ways. And we have talked about the outermost and innermost. Naturally, innermost is you can understand innermost corresponds to call by value, and outermost corresponds to call by name, because innermost is where you are taking the innermost one. So that's how the normal function call order is done. It is based on the depth of calls. So the innermost parameter is what you first evaluate, then you evaluate the function to which that parameter is going. That will compute another value, and so on. So innermost is basically call by value, and outermost is basically corresponding to call by name. But in terms of lambda expression, you could do mixed stuff also. We have seen this. Now, the third question was, if there is more than one reduction strategy, does each one lead to the same normal form expression? The answer is no. That's the tricky part that we are seeing here, that if we do in this given expression, if we do an outermost, then we will get a normal form. We will get an expression which does not have a beta redex. But if we do innermost, that is call by value, we will not get to a normal form, right? So it does make a difference. And the fourth question was, is there a reduction strategy that will guarantee? I mean, since there are, we can clearly see there are multiple strategies. There are possibilities that some will lead to a reduced expression, some other strategy will not. The question is there a reduction strategy that will guarantee a normal form? And we just took a note of the result by Curry, that if an expression has a normal form, then it can be found by the leftmost reduction. If you do the reduction from leftmost to right, then you will always find that. The normal order of reduction can have two outcomes. One, it will, if there is a normal form achievable, then it will reach that unique normal form, unique up to alpha reduction, renaming that you have understood. Or if nothing is possible, for example, what we saw in the previous case, that or the first case, that there is no normal form that is achievable, then certainly this process of reduction will not terminate. Naturally, you can see that this directly maps to the halting problem of Turing machine, and there would be no algorithmic way to determine if an arbitrary lambda expression, which of these two outcomes will happen, so that the problem might get undecidable. So that's a tricky. So based on this, we define two important order for rewriting, for reduction. One is normal order, which is rewrite the outermost, that is outermost from left occurrence of a function application, which is equivalent to call by name. And the other is applicative order, where we rewrite the innermost, again from the left, occurrence of a function, and do the function application there first. So which is equivalent to call by value. The normal order of evaluation always gives the same result as lazy evaluation, because it's called by name, but may end up evaluating an expression more than once, the same expression more than once, which the applicative order might avoid. To understand, let us take a very simple example. So let's double x be x plus x, average x, y is the average of them. So using the typical lambda kind of notation, double x is plus xx in the prefix, and average is divide of plus xy and 2, right? So this is, and with that we are trying to find the double of average of 2, 4. So this is a lambda expression, right? So we try to do that. We use normal order of evaluation, which is call by name, which means that we will go from outermost to inner from the left, and we will not evaluate the parameter, but we will replace it in the function. So as we do that, we have the parameter of double as average 2, 4. So in plus xx, we replace average 2, 4, average 2, 4 twice, right? So this is what we get. Now again, we go from left, so we will evaluate average 2, 4, which is divide and plus 2, 4 and 2, right? So that is because average xy was divide of plus xy and then 2. So then again, going from left, the next to evaluate is plus 2, 4. So we evaluate that, we get 6, 2. Average 2, 4 remains same. We do divide, we get plus 3, average 2, 4. And then we go on to doing the average, again divide plus 2, 4 and so on, we get 6. So you can see that average 2, 4 here is getting evaluated twice. So there are certain, implementation techniques to avoid this overhead in terms of a lazy evaluation. The system can recognize that you have multiple instances to evaluate, so it could cache the result of the first evaluation and use in the second. That's a different issue of efficiency of automation, but in terms of semantics, this is how we are getting to the semantics of this lambda expression, which is 6 by doing a normal order order of evaluation from outermost leftmost. You can do the applicative order by doing the reverse, which is call by value, the more familiar call by value, where you do the eager evaluation of first evaluating the parameters. So you evaluate average 2, 4, you are coming from inside to the outside. So you get divide plus 2, 4, this. You will naturally evaluate plus, you get divide 6, 2. Then you do the divide, you get 3. And then you finally have plus 3, 3, which is 6, which in this case leads to the same result, same normal form. And it also evaluates average only once because you are doing a eager evaluation, right? So it's appears to be more efficient. But as we have seen that as we have got from Curry's statement, that if there is a normal form, it will be achieved by the normal order of evaluation. So let's take another example. This is from the Boolean. So we have my if and the if expression that we had seen. So we know my if true xy is x, which is basically the first selector function, and my if false xy is y, which is a second selector function. Now given this, so take this expression to evaluate. My if less 3, 4 plus 5, 5 divide 1, 0. So these are the three components of the, so this is the Boolean condition, this is the true part, plus 5, 5, this is a false part. Now if you use normal order of evaluation, then what you will do, you will do a lazy one. So you will do the leftmost outermost, which is this less 3, 4. So that gives you less 3, 4 is 3 is indeed less than 4, right? So the result of this is true, and you get this. The remaining parameters remain same. Now you apply this next one. So you take this both of these arguments and directly apply on the my if. So you get true, gives you the true part. So your result is plus 5, 5. You evaluate, you get 10. Right? So by normal order, this is what you get. Try the applicative order of evaluation. You have the same expression. So now you will do the innermost. So you do the leftmost. So this is the first thing you will do, obviously. So this up to this point, it is the same. Just look at this and this. But then you are doing innermost. So instead of applying my if, you will have to evaluate plus 5, 5. So you get 10. Then you are left with this. And then you will have to do this, divide 1, 0. So that will lead to a divide by 0 error. So by applicative order, this is an this leads to an error, whereas by normal order, this leads to 10. Right. So that is the kind of differences that you can see. So by normal order, you can get to that normal form easily. So there is a important property which we usually use. This is called the property of strictness. If there is any evaluation order that will terminate and that will not generate an error, normal order of evaluation will terminate and not generate an error. So that is a kind of restatement of what Curry's result is, that there could be any order of evaluation. But if there exists an order of evaluation which terminates and does not generate error, the normal order of evaluation will also terminate and will not generate an error. Right. So that's a key result of lambda semantics. And any evaluation order that terminates without error will give the same result that any other evaluation order that terminates without error, right? So these two properties, which we are presenting here without a proof, certainly there are big theoretical proofs behind this, guarantee that normal order of evaluation is always going to be the most useful one. Now, in this context, we say a function f is strict in an argument if that argument is always evaluated whenever that application of function f is evaluated. A function f is strict in an argument. So you're talking about a function and one of its arguments. And you will say that this function is strict in that argument if to be able to evaluate that function, you always need to evaluate that argument. If a function is strict in an argument, we can safely evaluate the argument first if we need the value of applying the function. Right? So what does that strictness mean? So we can use lazy evaluation on an ad hoc basis. So for all arguments, some implementation of functional languages, we can improve efficiency by this strictness analysis. For example, if you consider plus AB is strict in both A and B. That is, you can never evaluate the function plus without evaluating A and without evaluating B. You need to evaluate both of them. So it is strict on both arguments. But we just saw the example of if x, y, z. Here, to evaluate this, you must evaluate x. Without that, you cannot do. The Boolean condition you must evaluate. So it is strict in x, but it is not strict in y or z, as we have just seen that we applied normal order and we did not need to evaluate z in that particular case, and we could still get the result, right? So it is not strict in y and z. So we can do some analysis and sometimes decide if the user defined function is strict in some of its arguments. If it is strict in some of its arguments, then we can get to be eager in terms of those. So some more examples. Double x is strict in x. Say squid nx, 2 parameters. If n is equal to 0, then x plus 1, else x minus n is again strict in n as well as in x. Because it's strict in n because you will always have to evaluate this condition. And then either you will evaluate, either you need the true expression or the false expression, but both of them need x. So it is strict in x as well. Whereas if you have crab nx, n equal to 0, x plus 1, else n, it is strict in n, but it is not strict in x, because if n equal to 0 is false, then you don't need the value of x to evaluate this function. So if a function is strict in an argument x, it is correct to pass x by value. So you need not do a lazy evaluation for that parameter, even with normal order evaluation semantics. So this is an important result in terms of actual implementation of functional programming languages, because certainly call by value is, or the applicative order wherever feasible, is a more efficient way of evaluation. But again, as you can understand, it is not always decidable whether a function is strict in an argument. If we do not know, if we cannot decide on that, then we will pass it using lazy evaluation, right? So finally, a normal order reduction always reduces the leftmost outermost beta redex or delta redex first. An applicative order reduction always reduces the leftmost innermost beta redex or delta redex first. So in this way, for any alpha expression, lambda expression of this form, where you have a abstraction applied to A, we say beta redex E is outside, beta redex E is outside of any beta redex that occurs in B, because naturally it is not a part of it, or A. These are inside of E. A beta redex in an alpha expression is outermost if there is no beta radix outside of it, and it is innermost if there is no beta radix inside of it. So this is just kind of trying to formally define it. So if you form a AST, abstract syntax tree, which all of you I'm sure know from the compiler theory, if you form a AST, you will be easily be able to see that. So there is a you can study this tree later on to understand every step of it. But here is an expression, a lambda expression, and I have constructed the AST for it, abstract syntax tree for it, where uh, com is a combination, which is an application, and lamb is a abstraction. So you have here you have add xy. So you have an application first. You are currying to get the addx function. Then you have com to get add xy. Then you have lambda y, this abstraction. So it's lambda y on this lambda expression. Then you have lambda x. So lambda this expression. In the in the second part here you have successor z. So there's an application. Then you have abstraction on z. Then you have 5, which naturally is just an expression by itself. Then you have an application here, so combination in this, and this whole thing applies onto this expression. So you have a combination here. Similarly, you'll have it for this side. So if you now look at the tree, you'll find that this is your outermost level, because this part of the tree is not contained in any other expression. Similarly, this part is independent of that, and this part here is totally contained and has no further expression. So this is the innermost one. So that's kind of, I mean, this is not something which is theoretically foundational for the semantics, but these are just glimpses to show you that it is possible to work out automated processes using this. You don't necessarily need human intelligence. You can just follow a structured process to get to the identification of outermost and innermost expressions, and accordingly apply the normal or applicative order. So finally, this is what you have. So if you have lambda n, add 5n, 8, then by applicative order you can, this is the innermost. So you will have add 5, the curried function, applying on to n. Then you have add 5, 8, which applied here, which gives you 13, and so on. Similarly, in the normal order, left to right, you will have the first application of the outermost one. So 8 is replaced in n, and then you do the 13. Right. So this is the basic process, and normal order will always give you the normal form if it exist. So, and if some order of evaluation can correctly without error get to a normal form, then the normal order of evaluation will always get to that form. So that's a basic. So I'll just see if there is any question. This is relatively straightforward though. Is there any question on the order of evaluation part? Seems no. Okay, that's good. So in that case, so we therefore close this part on lambda calculus semantics, where we have learnt about what is the notion of semantics of lambda expressions. We have learnt about free and bound variables, the safe substitution process, and the alpha, beta, eta, delta reduction rules, and how to apply them in terms of normal order to get to an get to a resultant normal form, and what are the conditions in which we could also take recourse to applicative order, and still using strictness we could still get the same results as of the normal order. So that completes our module 3. So what we will do now is we will now switch over to, before going into module 4, which talks about types of lambda expression, we would now take a look into a few functional programming languages which are directly based on lambda calculus. And this is this will be conducted in terms of illustration by example kind of approach. And our senior most TA Srijani Majumdar will present this part. Srijani, it's over to you. You can start presenting.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, so basically we'll be learning about 3 languages over the span of 2 classes. And I'm very sorry for that screen line. I mean, there are some issues with my computer screen, so please bear with that line. I need to get that fixed. So now what we'll do first is that we'll have an overview of what are the languages which we are going to study, and just a very quick overview of what type of constructs we learn about that languages. And then I'll start Haskell today, but not in depth, and then continue that along with the other languages on in the next class. So first things, so these are the 3 languages which we are going to study. Now this is a very small differences about what are functional and imperative languages. Basically it's just for you to have a read. So the major difference is like what the languages which we are going to study, as we go through the examples you'll be able to see that they are dependent only on its input. That means they are stateless. Okay, you cannot just modify the argument values which are being passed, the actual argument values and everything. So which can be done in imperative, a very important point. And second is that it depends on the, I mean, these are again all very subjective thing, like concentrates on the what and focuses on how. So these things will get clearer basically once we get to see the examples of the languages. But what you need to remember is that the stateless part, and also there will be other attributes of whether the languages are dynamically or statically typed, lazy or follows lazy or eager evaluation, functional, or is it like is a hybrid of functional and imperative. That's Lisp. The language Lisp is actually gives you the features for functional as well as imperative. So all these points will come up as we go through the worksheets of those languages. So just a very basic thing of who uses functional programming, because it was a very common question which came up while these classes were being taken, like why do we use functional programming, and literally people had also come up with this, like where is it actually used in, like in real industry in implementation. So these are some of the examples. Okay, and now so can go through it. Now, why use Haskell? Again, those things, again, what I mentioned was that it's like maintainable. I mean, apart from obviously its power as a purely functional programming language, there are a few other things, okay? And obviously because it's a statically typed language, so it gives you the same power as Python, but it is statically typed. So the type part is taken care of by Haskell. It's not going to be taken care of by Haskell. You have to define the correct types. In that case, sometimes the programming errors are less and it's easier to debug. Okay. And features of Haskell, these are the 4 important features which we are going to take up one by one. and these features will vary for all the functional programming languages. Okay, so I'll come to this later. Here. So these are the, and when we are going to start with a programming language, we'll actually have a look at all these features. Like we'll look into the operations, the various type of data structures and predicates, and all the different types of functions. How do you define lambdas, and how do you infer type, recursion, and input output functions. Even though some of the examples may look trivial, but it would actually help you to answer, program well in your tests and everywhere. And even if it is trivial, it is important for you to bear with me, because later, the syntaxes are very cumbersome. So discussing that would help you to remember it, basically. Now we come to another, this after Haskell, we are going to talk about scheme, basically. So scheme, again, it differs from Haskell. It has all the attributes of Haskell, but is dynamically typed. So as you know, like dynamically typed, it's more or less like Python, basically. So the type is taken care of scheme in scheme itself. And I'm going to show you examples where the statically typed and the dynamically typed attributes can create what kind of implementation errors or programming errors while you code in these languages, while we go to the worksheet. So again, what we are going to do is that we are going to look into all the operations syntaxes. The syntax part might be a bit tedious, but it is important. So syntaxes of all the arithmetic operations and constructs and functions and lambdas, recursion, input output functions, everything. And then the last language which we are going to talk about is Lisp. So Lisp has this features of imperative, as well as it is also a functional language. So the imperative in the sense is going to allow you to change the values of the arguments, or change the values of the variables, maintain the state, and do some more algorithms, apply some more algorithms on it. So that is the part of Lisp where you really want the two flavors of programming coming in. So that we are going to show with some examples. And then we are going to again look into the various constructs of Lisp programming. So, and now again, obviously we'll shift to the worksheet. So for this part of the lectures, this part of the tutorials, basically, we are going to completely have worksheets where we are actually where I have run the program. I've taken out the output and we are going to discuss that. And in few cases, I would really like to present those questions to you and would like all of you to answer back based on whatever syntaxes you have answered. So in some part, I've removed the answer to just get it from you. Okay, so I'll just on this. I'll be sharing the screen again. So. Yeah, I think, is this part visible? My WordPad?
Yes, visible.
Okay, I think Sahil, your microphone is unmuted, and there's a, yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so coming to Haskell, so these are your commands by which you have to actually install Haskell in Linux. Okay, so these are various types of commands. Use any, you can use like all these three, and then either the last two, any one of them, basically. So I will be starting with very simple, what do you say? Simple commands. But before that, I would like to show you, like I've installed that in my system. So I'll just show you that. Showman, is my Linux screen visible?
No, it's only PPT.
The PPT, right? So you can see this now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And my terminal?
Terminal is also visible.
Okay, right. Yeah. So I'll just open these two side by side. So maybe I'll start with my Linux thing only. Okay, fine. So as I said, so these are the commands to install Haskell. I've already installed it. So what you get, like basically once you've installed Haskell, I mean these things, it's very easier for you, but just to give you an overview, is just kindly take it as an overview, because so once you type GHCI, so the normal interpreter's screen will come up just like Python, where you can actually use any kind of commands and run it. So I will start with the simple arithmetic operations first. So like basically, if you see here, if you could just add 7, if you put 75 plus 90, or if you just put a negative and everything. So these are the arithmetic operations which are there. You can just add this here in the screen and it's going to give you the answer, basically. Okay, so those are like interpreter types, very simple, but just to start with. You have Boolean algebra operators, and then you have equality operators. So these are all which comes with Haskell. So like here, if you see this, like hello equals to hello, so it will actually return you true, basically. So some of the few predicates, I mean these operators which you can directly use inside even your functions which you define using Haskell, so that easily you can get some output out of it. Just have a look at it now. Function. Now, if you see here, there are some inbuilt, obviously like any other languages, there are inbuilt library functions. So you can use max, successor, and using that you can do some arithmetic operations. And you can use this inside a function which you're defining also. That is the reason I'm actually going through all of them, so that when you write functions in your test or whatever you're trying to solve, basically you can use the easier inbuilt functions which are already available as part of Haskell. Okay. Now, so, and this is where I'm going to show you like how you are going to create a new function of yourself. So you can give it a function, this name, x double me, like you say x equals to x plus x, and save it as func.hs. And then using double me, you can also have another function created as double us. I mean, so you can create your own inbuilt functions. The same the features are same as any programming language. It's just that you have to remember that everything is like you encode it in form of a function, and then you can keep on using that in your higher order functions, basically. And if you see double small number, okay, it's just some of these functions which I've written, and these are just for your references. You can just have a look at all of these, basically. And these are all taken up, and all, if you see the GHCI I mean prelude screen coming up, so all these have been run over there and has been put here, the results. Okay, now the data structures. Now it's a very important thing, because while we come to lazy and eager evaluation, I'm going to also talk about infinite lists in Haskell, but we'll do that later. So what I wanted to say was that lists are a very commonly used data structure in Haskell, and obviously it's homogeneous. So this is how you define a list. Okay, and so you can actually, and how do you actually, there's this keyword let. Just remember these one or two few points that will actually allow you. It's the same, the programming essence remains the same, but you actually bind a name to this using let. Okay, and then you can have a lot of operations on the lists, basically. So you can do a plus here. If you see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then here. So we are just concatenating the list, basically. Appending the list, two lists together, we are just concatenating. Similarly, hello and world are both of string types, so we are doing all concatenations there. Now, there's a unique feature in Haskell, which we have tried out. So these are all, so list comparison. If you see here, the second list, all the elements are not higher, all the elements of the first list are not higher than all the elements of the second list. But what it does here, the list comparison operator here mostly takes up the first element only. So that's why it returns all true. You can try this out. This has been tried out. So the way I told you to install, you can try these out. So these are some unique features which you need to remember and might be part of some tricky questions which might come up. Okay, and obviously you can have sublists, lists within lists, and you can do operations within that. So all these examples have been worked out, and you can just use that in your screen and run it and check. These things will be loaded, basically uploaded to Moodle. And obviously when you're using a list, so you must be aware that for all these functional languages, they have very good predicates based on lists. So you can find out heads, tails, the last, the init, and you can also have like basically this take 3. You just remember this take command basically. This I'll actually again reinforce and talk about this when we are talking about infinite list and lazy evaluation later. That this allows you to just take up a few elements from the list and work on that. And that doesn't mean that this iterates over the whole list, or it's going to even ask you for the length of the list. It's not going to ask you that. Take any list and just take first 3 elements of it, or take the first 3 elements, add something to it. Like I'll come to that. So these are the few very important predicates which you should use for Haskell basically while you're working with lists. Okay. Then obviously we have Texas ranges. So this is something which is like, I think it's well known, Texas ranges, but Haskell supports that. You can just tell them like it's going to create the list itself. You just tell them what to create until when to when, give them the start and the end point. So that can be created. Okay. Please let me know if you have any questions till now, but I doubt you'll have some questions here because these are very simplistic attributes and features of Haskell. Now comes cycle. So like I said, that basically cycle is that it takes in a list and it will keep on cycling. It's going to just keep on iterating over the list. Now, how do we stop that? We can tell them, okay, I'll only take the first 10 elements of that cycle. So it keeps on cycling 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you can just take the first 10 elements. That is what is going to give you back. But it's going to terminate at that point. Okay. Now, I wanted to all of you to do this once. Just a second. Sorry, my system got a bit slow. There are too many things running onto it. So yeah, so I really want all of you to just solve this. This first thing I'm solving is that like it is mostly, if you just have a look at it, it's going to look like somewhere a set theory and it's a mixed kind of syntax. But what it's doing is that it's going to take up the elements which belongs to 1 to 10, and then it's going to also see whether x star 2 is greater than or equals to 12, and it's going to extract those. So that is 12, 16, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, correct? Because all these elements greater, if you multiply that by 2, it's going to be greater than 12. So this is a way of, these are list operations. So I really want you to do this one. If you guys really want to interact, can you just, because I always do this in class when these tutorials happen. So can you solve this? It's a very simple thing, but can anyone come up with the answer? Is this visible? I'll just copy this and put it here. I'll just put it here. Yeah. So can anyone come up with the answer based on whatever we discussed till now? Like anyone who volunteers to come up with the answer for this? And I would actually know that you have understood the concepts of lists and the predicates and what can be done with this. It's a very simple thing, basically. Okay, I think no one volunteers. Fine, I'll get to it then, no problem. I think Mayank has written something, 13, 15, 19. Any more answers? I'll get to it. I mean, I'll just share the screen once more. Maybe that's creating an issue. Just a second. My screen sharing stopped because I'm actually working with 2 machines. So, Showman, is this visible again?
Yes, visible.
Yeah. Okay. Mayank, that wouldn't be the answer, but anyways, it's a good try, but it's actually the opposite, but it's okay. I think no one is volunteering. So what you see here is nothing. It's just that, I mean, slash equals to means that it doesn't belong to these elements, and you just take up elements from 10 to 20. It is as simple as that, basically. But you have to understand, that is where I was actually pointing out that the syntaxes these might look trivial, but the syntaxes are extremely significant in Haskell. So if you miss out on any one of the syntaxes, and if you do not know the meaning of these, you'll not be able to solve this, even though it is extremely easy, you know, like. But anyways, Mayank, thank you for replying. So 10 to 20, all the elements apart from 13 and 15 and 19. That's it. It's as simple as that, basically. Okay, so you can try these out. Just try these out in your Haskell screen. Try to do a little bit of tweaking with it. Take up some more operators, and just to get a flavor of it. Wouldn't take much time. Okay. Okay. Now another data structure which we are going to talk about is tuple. Now tuple, as you can see, these are, I mean, you know, like Christopher Walken 55. Okay, so non-homogeneous basically. Okay, so you just have a look at this. So what you can see here is like the tuple, I mean, at least, you know, I mean, they have to be of the same size, I think so. Yes, of the same size. There's a typo here. I'll just fix this, because you cannot have a 3-element tuple inside a tuple of 2-element tuples. Okay, so I'll fix that basically. You can have a look, but obviously it's non-homogeneous. Okay, now now we are going to start with types and classes. So those were the initial few parts on data structures and operators and various kind of predicates which are available. Now types and classes, as I earlier said, that Haskell is statically typed. So you obviously have to infer the type, okay, or you have to set the type when you are actually writing a function or defining a function or anything. So if you see, there is a predicate using which you can find out the type, that is :t. So you can find out a type of any variable, basically any list or anything, okay, any operation, anything you can find out a type with :t. And the types of functions, again, when you are actually doing an add 3, for example, here I'm defining a function of adding 3 elements, I have to specify the type. So here what it means is that integer, what you see is like the last one is the return type and the first 3 is the input type, basically. Okay, so that is how you specify a type. Similarly for factorial, you take up a number, you create, and what you get is again a number, it's an integer. So that's how you specify the type. If you do not specify the type, basically, then you know it might get Haskell will actually not process it, and it will give you an implementation error. Basically, you can also try that using. I'll show you how to run a Haskell program today. I don't know how much time we have. Yeah. So similarly, you can find out. So for lists, basically, this is the type. Basically, A in brackets. So list or tuple or anything. Then equal A operators and so these are all the types, basically types of the operators, types of the lists, and types of built-in and composite data structures and operators and everything. You can find type for everything in Haskell using :t. Okay, and let bindings and functions, again, what you can do here is that inside the functions you can define, as I said, define variables using let, use that, and you can I mean, return the value of the functions. Okay, so yes, I think I'll talk about this and then I'll maybe close. Is that case statements? I had told you, like for example in C, if you, I don't know if you've tried it or not. Have you ever tried a switch statement or a case statement having a different return value or something like that? It would actually throw an error, basically. Okay, so or if statement with a different thing. So this is the same thing with Haskell, basically. So what you see here is that it is like this, it's the output should be string. Okay, that is what you're specifying that okay, this case statement output should be string for all the cases, but it has a singleton list in one, okay, which will actually create a problem. So if you run this, you'll actually get this error here. I mean, this Haskell errors are not very self-modifying or something, but what you can understand here is that the return types of the case statements are not of the same types, so you'll not be able to process this basically. Okay, so recursion, I'll come to this. So I'll just show how to run a Haskell program once. So one way is obviously you can use the interpreter screen like you do it in Python for smaller functions or smaller, I mean, operations which you want. And here I have written a Haskell program here. If you see, this I'll be sharing with you. So these have all the multiple such programs written. So this is like reversing all the elements of the list basically. And at the end you have a main where you actually pass the argument, and all these functions are defined. So you can just use the function name. It's the same thing like library functions built in, and you're just using main to use it. Just the essence remains the same. So as you see, I've already given here the commands just to connect with you. Yes, so this is the command which you run. Okay, so I'll be doing that. So you will be able to see how the list is. So the output here, it is like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very simple. I mean, it's very trivial, but still I'm doing it. So I'll just give this name as func3 and func1.hs. It's going to link that, and then after it is that output file is done, so it's just to run this. So this is the reverse list 4321. So multiple such functions you can create, and in the main you can have multiple again calls to those functions, and again using another function you can define a function there and call all of them. So whatever type of features you want to implement, you can do that basically. So I'll stop over here today because I think it's 10:58. And I'll continue with Haskell and other languages the next day. Sir, I mean,
Okay.
it's 10:58.
Okay. Thank you, Srijani. Thanks for the overview. We'll continue. I think, Srijani, we should share these documents, worksheets, and presentation on the Moodle so that people can. And it will be good to give certain pointers of where to download these language implementations from, and if there are tutorials that they can refer to.
Yes, sir.
Because
I'll be giving
practicing
that. The installation instructions are there, all for Linuxes, and
Okay.
for the tutorial links, I'll share, sir. Some of them.
Sure, that will be good. And the students, please, these need a little bit of practice, but what would be significant to note is the close relation between the way the language constructs are defined and the way the lambda calculus is. So once the overview is over, we'll talk more about that. So we are completely out of time. We'll close today, and Wednesday morning, again, Srijani will continue with these languages, and then after she finishes, we'll get into typed lambda calculus discussions on Wednesday. Thank you very much. Have a good day.